I don't know if we should really be worrying about titles and so on, but it seems like a sensitive thing these days. I just want to clarify I'm not a doctor. I'm here as a researcher and an activist to speak to you about and to think with you about alternatives to the economic crisis and the political crisis that we are facing in Sri Lanka. It's been 3 years since the economic crisis hit us hard, although the crisis has been brewing for a long time in Sri Lanka. It's been 3 years since the government of Sri Lanka informed that it's defaulting on the foreign debt that it owed. It's been 3 years, I think, since we have also now been in this new IMF agreement. And we have all experienced what it means to be under very harsh austerity measures. But I guess the question that keeps bothering all of us is, although we know people are not really hopeful about this path forward in terms of the recovery, why is there still reluctance among various groups to be clearer and clearly sort of voice out opposition to the IMF and the IMF path to recovery? Why are we not still able to create enough outcry in this country about what these IMF conditions have meant for us, right? And I think if we are to think about and move forward in terms of alternatives, I think we need to grapple with this question. We all know that it's not an easy way out, right? So we are not being naive by just saying, let's get out of the IMF program. That's not what we are here to talk about and to think through. But we have to be very clear about why we are opposed to an IMF path to recovery. And I think that the first point there, and I think many of us have already touched on, is that the IMF is also a class project. It's a project of redistribution that dispossesses people, ordinary people, working people, right? And it redistributes wealth upward, right? And that's why we are opposed to the IMF project. We have seen in the past 3 years how the conditionalities of the IMF have directly impacted normal people's lives, right? From the revenue side conditionalities that the IMF imposed, whether it's direct taxes, from the fiscal consolidation conditionalities that the IMF has imposed in restraining government expenditure, which directly impacts education, health, the social provisions, social protection for people, right? And whether it's in the long-term sort of reforms the IMF together with the World Bank has imposed in this country for decades now, have impacted rural production, have impacted people's working conditions in this country. We have seen it all, right? And in the last, from 2022, we've seen how poverty levels have doubled. We've seen how people have even had to sort of change their meals, right? Their sort of basic food habits. And that has not gone away yet in the last 3 years. And that's the reason why we oppose the IMF agreement. Because it's a direct assault on ordinary people, on working people's lives. We have also seen how the failure of the market, which was generated by the economic crisis, and the recovery program, so-called recovery programs implemented through the IMF reforms, have also managed to push the risks of the failure of the market into the home sphere, right? And which has a direct implication on the family structures, particularly on women, right? Because when the market fails, the risks of that failure are absorbed into into the social reproductive fear, right? And it has created a crisis for social reproduction as well. And the burden of that crisis has been largely absorbed by women. So while women have to go out and make a living in a failing market, women have also been put with the burden of having to put food on the table. While there's inflation, while food prices skyrocketed, while there's wage repression, while household incomes reduced, right? And while there was already a household debt crisis in the country, exacerbated by microfinance loans, even before the economic crisis hit us, right? So that's my first point. We oppose the IMF program because it's an assault on working people and on women. Secondly, if you look at the IMF demands itself, right, the program, in addition to the debt restructuring, where the government has to pay back loans, which is a badly negotiated agreement, which the current government, the NPP government, unfortunately, as soon as they came into power, had also endorsed. And the IMF conditions moving forward, which constrains the government's ability to make policy or to construct the government's budget, are all unrealistic. Right? So moving forward, we know that these conditionalities are not going to be able to adhere to. And that is the second reason, I think. We have to really be cautious about endorsing this IMF program. It's not an easy way out where we sort of say, okay, just for the sake of stability, let's keep up with the program. No, because I think if we do keep up with this program, the indications are all clear, the red flags are all there, that we are going to move into another crisis. I know others are going to speak about the IMF demands itself and the conditionality, so I won't dwell much on that point. The third point I want to sort of touch on is that, very often we forget that because of the impact of the economic crisis hits the working people, it's not just a crisis for the working people, right? An economic crisis is actually a crisis for capitalism. It's a crisis for capitalists as well, right? And while the Sri Lankan government and the Sri Lankan people are being forced to adhere to this IMF formula, we know that neoliberalism is in crisis globally, right? So while we are seeing it breaking down from the US to every other country in the world, we're seeing the neoliberal project sort of in ruins right now. Sri Lanka is being forced to adhere to the same rules that the neoliberal project, that was part of the neoliberal project. While we are seeing that the game itself is changing, right? So even, now when you listen to some of the Sri Lankan economists and neoliberals, you hear them sort of pleading to say, let's stick by the rules, right? While we are actually saying that the game itself has changed. So, it is quite clear that this neoliberal path is not going to lead Sri Lanka out of the crisis. It's not going to go well for the working people. And if we are to think about the global economy and the global order, we are also in the cusp of the global order unraveling. So are there going to be actually consequences of Sri Lanka sticking to this neoliberal program? And I believe that the consequences are going to be political as well, right? In addition to causing huge economic suffering for ordinary people. We are in an era where we're seeing the specter of fascism on the rise, right? From governments of neo-fascists, neo-Nazis, white nationalists, to authoritarian regimes being elected in various parts of the world, including in the sort of so-called liberal democracies of the West, right? So in this context, right, there will be repercussions that will be political for Sri Lanka as well, and we have to think a few steps ahead, not just about what the current political climate is like. What would happen even the people's economic discontent are not addressed. And we know in Sri Lanka we've had a long history of ethnic conflict, right? And the way economic discontent has been managed by successive rulers has always been to create another within the country, to pander to ethno-nationalist politics, and unfortunately the history of the left has also been that they have been comfortable enough to endorse the nationalist or ethno-nationalist project as a fix to the crisis, which is invariably a class conflict, right? So in this context, I think there are various alternatives that people are speaking about, and including by those who are who would like to see themselves as operating from outside of a neoliberal sort of framework. The first has been that corruption can be a fix, but we know that corruption is again another easy way to pander to capitalists who also like that idea of corruption, right? And the elites. Corruption alone or savings within the government alone is not going to be a solution to this very deep crisis, right? It's a crisis, it's a structural crisis, and you can't address it by just addressing corruption or savings. We are also hearing a lot about changing geopolitical powers and alignments, and somehow that these alternate geopolitical alignments can be an alternative to the current crisis. Right? So when Sri Lanka's crisis hit and when we realized it's a debt crisis, the West tried to portray it as a crisis of Chinese capital. We know that's not true. The biggest portion of Sri Lanka's foreign debt is actually sovereign bond debts held in Western international markets. But then there's the whole thing about, okay, if China versus India, right? If we sort of align ourselves with one country or another, that somehow that's going to help us come out of the economic crisis. Geopolitics is not a fix, right? And I think there's also thinking about generating sort of some kind of an alternate solidarity among countries in the global south, because we share the debt crisis with many other countries in the global south, who have also been subjected to structural adjustment programs and the IMF treatment. Right? And I think these are useful ideas, but I think there are limitations for all these ideas, because we know that the authoritarian politics and in the global south will also be a challenge when countries deal and states deal with each other. So where do we actually go from here, right? Because on the one hand, we are seeing that the sort of whole mantra of God, family, nation, free enterprise, right, on the rise, with authoritarian governments sort of pushing them in that direction. So they like the market being disrupted. They talk about disruption and that innovation can come out of the market. But they're also talking about family and tradition and going back to conservative values, because they also need that, right, in order for authority, control, for security, for sustenance, and so on. Right? So on the one hand, while capital, is portrayed as not being sort of conscious of political borders, the nationalists sort of fetishize them. Right? And I believe the alternative can't be as simple as, because we oppose one, we sort of pick up on the other. I think we have to start thinking much more deeply about that, which also means while the neoliberals sound crazy when they keep going on about sticking to the rules when the game has changed, I think the left has to be careful from not putting forward sort of very simplistic and simple ideas as our alternatives as well. Because it's a deeper crisis, I think it requires much more deeper thought. Right? But we can't just sit back and say, okay, we need to deeper thought and not intervene. So where do we begin? I think there's a lot of conversation about how do we get out of the IMF program and the sort of challenge of getting out of an IMF program by a country like Sri Lanka in the global order. And I think that's important to think about. But what about the struggles within the country, right? How are we going to challenge the ruling elites or the capitalists within the country, right? Who are willing to go along and sink with the sinking ship, right? Take Sri Lanka levels. How are we going to sort of challenge them? And unfortunately, working people's politics, right? Whether it's trade union politics, which in the past challenged the sort of excesses of capitalism in the country, right, is also in crisis. Right? So there is a need for us to sort of rethink how working class politics can begin to engage in those class struggles from within the country itself. Right? And the second and last point I want to leave is that while we think about, okay, how do we exit out of the IMF program, what is our vision for the country, right? For the longest time, successive, government budgets after government budgets have just sort of continued in one single trajectory, and that is to put forward a neoliberal idea of development, right? How do we move away from that, and what could be sort of an alternate vision? And we have to start having those conversations and construct that alternate vision, even as we think about an exit from the IMF program. So what do people think about food and food security and food sovereignty in an island that is sort of prone to huge climate crisis risks, right? How would people think about it if they are not sort of imposed by global capital or IFI's programs or by IMF dictates? How would people want to organize production differently? How would people want to think about social protection, whether it's education, health, or other forms of social protection that are necessary, right, for our society that's prone to so much risk and disruption? And I think there needs to be a change in terms of the pedagogy of our politics as well. Because very often we think that these great ideas and novel ideas emerge from experts. Of course, that's important. But also in a dialogue with ordinary people, because again, history shows us that it is through sort of working people's politics that alternatives have emerged. Thank you.